The world didn't go black when the third bullet hit me. It went red. I could smell the gunpowder mixed with the sickening sweetness of Chanel No. 5 and iron. I looked down, not at my own ruined chest, but at the small, trembling boy underneath me. He was spotless, perfect, alive. Then a shadow fell over us. The devil of New York, Lorenzo Caruso, dropped to his knees. He didn't look at his crying son. He looked at me, a nobody waitress bleeding out on a $10,000 rug. He grabbed the paramedic's collar and screamed a command that silenced the entire room. "You don't let her die. She is my wife now." New York City doesn't care if you're tired. It only cares if you can keep up. For Sarah Miller, keeping up meant a double shift at the Pierre, one of Fifth Avenue's most historic and expensive hotels. It was 8:00 p.m. on a Tuesday, and her feet were already throbbing inside the cheap black non-slip shoes she'd bought at Walmart 3 months ago. The grand ballroom was suffocatingly hot, smelling of roasted duck, heavy lilies, and old money. This was the Gala for the Future, a charity event where Manhattan's elite pretended to care about the poor while wearing watches that cost more than Sarah's entire life earnings. "Table 4 needs more champagne. Move." Miller, the floor manager, a sweaty man named Mr. Henderson, hissed into her earpiece. "On it," Sarah whispered, adjusting the heavy tray on her shoulder. She was 24, but she felt 50. Her blonde hair was pulled back so tight it gave her a headache, a requirement of the uniform. She moved through the crowd like a ghost. That was the job, be invisible. Fill the glass, take the plate, disappear. If a guest noticed you, you were doing it wrong. She navigated past a group of women discussing their summers in the Hamptons. "So I told the contractor, if the marble isn't Carrara, tear it out." One woman in a red Valentino gown laughed. Sarah tightened her grip on the tray. Her own apartment in Queens had a leaking ceiling and a heater that only worked when it felt like it. She was 2 weeks late on rent, and her younger brother Toby needed new insulin. The American healthcare system was a shark, and Sarah was treading water. "Excuse me," a deep, gravelly voice murmured. Sarah froze. The crowd parted like the Red Sea. Walking through the entrance wasn't just a man. It was an atmosphere shift. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. He was tall, wearing a bespoke midnight blue tuxedo that fit him like a second skin. His face was sharp angles and shadows with eyes the color of cold espresso. Lorenzo Enzo Caruso. Even Sarah, who tried to ignore the gossip columns, knew who he was. The papers called him a logistics tycoon. The streets called him the capo dei capi of the East Coast. He didn't walk, he stalked, and clinging to his hand was a small boy. The boy Leo looked about 6. He was a miniature replica of his father dressed in a tiny tuxedo, but his eyes were wide and terrified. He clutched a small battered toy robot in his free hand, looking overwhelming by the flashing cameras and the sea of strangers. "No photos," Enzo said. He didn't shout, but the command was absolute. The paparazzi lowered their lenses instantly. Sarah watched from the shadows of the bar station. She saw the way Enzo's hand rested protectively on the boy's shoulder. It was a heavy, possessive grip. He loves the kid, she thought, but he doesn't know how to comfort him. The night wore on. The speeches began. Sarah was clearing plates at table 9 when she felt a tug on her apron. She looked down. It was the boy, Leo. He had somehow slipped away from the wall of bodyguards surrounding his father's table. "I dropped Optimus," he whispered, his lip trembling. Sarah glanced around. The bodyguards were scanning the perimeter, distracted by a waiter dropping a tray near the kitchen. They hadn't noticed the little prince had wandered off. She looked at the floor. Under the heavy velvet tablecloth, the toy robot lay on its side. Sarah crouched down, ignoring the protest of her knees. She picked up the toy and wiped a speck of dust off it. "Here you go, buddy." She smiled, her voice soft. It was the first real smile she'd shown all night. Optimus Prime is tough. He can handle a fall. Leo's eyes lit up. He took the toy. "My dad says I have to be tough too." Sarah's heart pinched. You can be tough and still need help sometimes. Even Optimus needs the Autobots. Leo stared at her, mesmerized. People usually spoke to him like he was a fragile vase or a future king. Sarah spoke to him like he was a 6-year-old boy. "Leo." The bark came from behind them. Enzo Caruso was standing there. Up close, he was terrifying. He smelled of sandalwood and danger. He loomed over Sarah, his eyes scanning her for threats. "I'm sorry, sir." Sarah stood up quickly, lowering her head. "He just dropped his toy." Enzo looked at the toy in his son's hand, then at Sarah. His gaze lingered on her frayed collar and the dark circles under her eyes. For a second, the mask slipped, and she saw exhaustion in the Mafia boss's eyes, too. "Thank you," Enzo said stiffly. He placed a hand on Leo's head. "Stay close, Leo. I told you. It's not safe." "Yes, Papa," Leo mumbled. As they walked away, Sarah let out a breath she didn't know she was holding. She checked her cheap Casio watch. 9:45 p.m. Just 2 more hours. Then she could go home, count her tips, and pray she had enough for the insulin. She didn't know that in 15 minutes money would be the last thing on her mind. The atmosphere in the ballroom changed at 10 o'clock p.m. It wasn't something you could see. It was something you felt. The air grew static, like the moments before a thunderstorm breaks over the Hudson River. Sarah was near the service entrance, refilling water glasses for a table of investment bankers from Goldman Sachs. Her position gave her a view of the entire floor, including the VIP dais where Enzo Caruso sat. Leo was coloring in a book, bored out of his mind. Enzo was talking to a senator, but his eyes never stopped moving. He was scanning the exits, the kitchen doors, the balcony. Sarah moved to the next table. As she poured, she noticed a waiter she didn't recognize. The Pierre had a strict staff roster. Sarah knew everyone. She knew that Jose had a newborn, that Maria had a bad hip, and that David stole mints from the front desk. But she didn't know the man moving toward the VIP table. He was walking too fast. Waiters are trained to glide, to be unobtrusive. This man was cutting a straight line through the crowd, his eyes locked on one target. He wasn't carrying a tray. His right hand was tucked inside his white service jacket. Sarah frowned. "What is he doing?" Then she saw it. A flash of metal under the crystal chandeliers. A suppressor. The long black cylinder screwed onto the end of a pistol. Time seemed to warp. It slowed down to a crawl. The man was 10 feet away from Enzo. But Enzo was turned away, laughing at something the senator said. The bodyguards were looking outward at the crowd, not at the staff. They assumed the threat would come from a rival, not a server. The gunman wasn't aiming at Enzo. He was aiming at Leo. The realization hit Sarah like a physical blow. They aren't trying to kill the boss. They're trying to break him. Sarah didn't think. She didn't calculate the distance or the danger. She didn't think about Toby waiting for her in Queens or the unpaid rent. She dropped the water pitcher. It shattered a loud crash, that should have alerted everyone, but the noise was swallowed by the orchestra playing a swell of Beethoven. She ran. She wasn't wearing running shoes. She was wearing slippery, cheap plastic soles. She kicked them off as she sprinted her socks, sliding on the polished parquet floor. "No!" she screamed. The scream tore through the music. Enzo turned. The gunman raised the weapon. Sarah threw herself. She didn't tackle the gunman. She was too far away. She did the only thing she could. She dove in front of the small boy, sitting in the high-backed velvet chair. Phoot! The first bullet hit her in the left shoulder. It felt like being punched by a sledgehammer. The force spun her around. Phoot! The second bullet tore through her stomach. This one burned. A hot, searing fire that made her gasp. She collapsed over Leo, covering his small body with hers, her arms wrapping around his head to shield his eyes. Phoot! The third bullet embedded itself in her lower back, just inches from her spine. The silence that followed lasted only a heartbeat, but it felt like an eternity. Sarah lay slumped over the boy, her white uniform turning crimson. She could feel Leo shaking underneath her, his small hands clutching her apron. "Stay down," she wheezed, blood bubbling past her lips. "Don't. Look." Then chaos erupted. "Man down, secure the package." Gunfire returned from everywhere. Enzo's security team decimated the assassin in seconds. The fake waiter dropped riddled with holes before his body even hit the floor. Screams filled the ballroom. Billionaires scrambled under tables, overturning thousands of dollars of wine and food. But Enzo Caruso didn't move for cover. He vaulted over the table, ignoring the senator who was cowering on the floor. He landed next to the pile of white and red fabric that was Sarah. He pulled her off his son, his hands shaking, not with fear, but with a rage so profound it looked like madness. "Leo!" Enzo barked. "Leo, are you hit?" The boy was covered in blood, but he shook his head, sobbing. "It's not mine, Papa. It's hers." "She saved me." Enzo looked at Sarah. She was pale, her skin turning the color of ash. Her breath was coming in short, wet rattles. Her eyes were unfocused, staring up at the grand chandelier. "Why?" Enzo whispered, his voice cracking. "Who are you?" "Sarah." She whispered, her voice barely audible over the sirens approaching in the distance. "My brother. Toby. Insulin." Her eyes rolled back. "No. No," Enzo roared. He placed his hands over the wound in her stomach, pressing down hard. The blood oozed between his fingers, staining his diamond cufflinks and his bespoke suit. This was the blood of a peasant mixing with the hands of a king. Paramedics burst through the double doors, flanked by NYPD officers. They rushed toward the scene, but Enzo's bodyguards blocked them, guns drawn. "Let them through," Enzo commanded. The medics fell to their knees beside Sarah. One of them, a seasoned EMT named Collins, checked her pulse and shook his head grimly. "She's lost too much blood. BP is crashing. We need to transport, but..." He looked at the severity of the wounds. "She's a Jane Doe, likely no insurance. We'll take her to County." "County," Enzo snarled. County Hospital was where people went to die in hallways. "She took a bullet for my son. So protocol dictates protocol." Enzo stood up. He looked like a demon rising from hell. He was covered in her blood. He looked around the room. The press was there. The rival families were there watching. The world was watching. He needed to save her life. But more than that, he needed to ensure that whoever sent that assassin knew that she was under his protection. If she survived this, the assassin would come back to finish the job. Unless she was untouchable. Enzo looked down at Sarah's fading face. He made a decision that would shatter the truce of the 5 families. "She doesn't go to county," Enzo announced, his voice booming through the silent ballroom. "Take her to New York Presbyterian. Call Dr. Rossi. Tell him to prep the OR. So Dr. Rossi is a private surgeon. He won't operate on a waitress without authorization and upfront payment," the medic stammered. Enzo grabbed the medic by the vest. "She is not a waitress," Enzo hissed loud enough for the cameras to hear. "She is my wife." A collective gasp went through the room. We didn't know you were married, Mr. Caruso," the medic stuttered, terrified. "I am now," Enzo said, his eyes cold and hard as diamond. He looked at his head of security. "Get the jet ready. If she dies, every person in this room dies." He looked back at the medic. "You treat her like Mrs. Lorenzo Caruso. You treat her like the Queen of New York. Do you understand?" Yes, sir." They loaded Sarah onto the stretcher. As they wheeled her away, Enzo scooped up Leo in one arm. He walked alongside the stretcher, his hand gripping Sarah's limp, blood-stained hand. He squeezed it. "You don't get to die, Sarah Miller," he whispered into the chaos. "You owe me an explanation, and I owe you a life." The waiting room of the VIP wing at New York Presbyterian was silent save for the hum of the industrial air conditioning and the rhythmic tapping of Enzo Caruso's Italian leather shoe against the sterile tile floor. It had been 4 hours. 4 hours since the doors to Surgery Suite 1 had swung shut, swallowing the girl with the blonde hair and the fraying uniform. Enzo sat in a chair that was too small for him, his elbows resting on his knees, his hands clasped together. They were scrubbed clean, now he had washed them in the bathroom sink until the water ran clear. But he could still feel the phantom warmth of her blood. It was a sticky, accusing sensation that soap couldn't remove. Beside him, curled into a tight ball on a leather love seat, was Leo. The boy had finally fallen asleep, exhausted by trauma. He was wearing an oversized hospital t-shirt because his tuxedo had been ruined. Even in sleep, Leo's face was pinched, his eyebrows drawn together in a nightmare. "Boss." Enzo didn't look up. He knew the footsteps. It was James, his consigliere and oldest friend. James looked out of place in the clinical brightness, his grey wool coat smelling of the damp New York night. "Report." Enzo said, his voice a low rumble that didn't wake the boy. James sat in the chair opposite him, keeping his voice hushed. The shooter was a freelancer, Serbian national. No direct ties to the families, but the weapon was high grade. Someone hired him to make it look like an accident or a robbery gone wrong. But hitting the kid? James shook his head, his jaw tight. That was a message. They wanted to end your bloodline. Enzo's eyes flicked to the sleeping boy. A muscle feathered in his jaw. They failed. Because of her. Yes, James agreed quietly. Because of the waitress. Sarah Miller. I ran her background. Enzo finally looked up. His eyes were bloodshot, the exhaustion of the adrenaline crash setting in. Tell me. It's bleak, Enzo. Parents died in a car wreck 4 years ago. She dropped out of community college to take care of her brother Tobias. He's 19, type 1, diabetic, brittle. He's been in and out of the ICU because they can't afford the good insulin or the continuous monitors. She works 60 hours a week at the Pierre and another 20 at a diner in Queens just to keep the lights on. Enzo stared at the wall. He thought of the moment in the ballroom. My brother. Toby. Insulin. Her last thoughts hadn't been fear of death. They had been fear of failing her brother. She's alone, Enzo murmured. No one to miss her if she dies on that table. No one to protect her if she survives. That brings us to the other problem, James said, leaning in. The press. The video of you screaming that she's your wife is trending on Twitter. It's on CNN. The 5 families are calling. The commission is confused. If they find out you lied to get her into surgery, if they find out she's just a civilian witness, she's a loose end, Enzo finished the thought. If she's a civilian, the people who hired the shooter will finish the job. They can't leave a witness who saw the shooter's face up close. They'll kill her in her hospital bed. Exactly. Unless she really is my wife, Enzo said. The air in the room seemed to get heavier. Enzo, you can't be serious. You can't marry a stranger to clean up a PR mess. Enzo looked at the double doors of the surgery suite. He remembered the weight of her body as she threw herself over his son. He remembered the ferocity in her eyes when she told Leo he didn't have to be tough. She took 3 bullets for a boy she didn't know James. My own captains wouldn't have moved that fast. Enzo stood up, walking to the window that overlooked the East River. I owe her a life debt. In our world, a life debt is binding. The doors to the surgery suite opened with a hydraulic hiss. Enzo turned instantly. Dr. Rossi, the chief of trauma surgery, stepped out. He looked exhausted, his surgical cap pulled low. He stripped off his gloves, his expression unreadable. Enzo walked toward him, stopping 2 feet away. He didn't ask. He just waited. She's alive, Rossi said. Enzo let out a breath, his shoulders dropping half an inch. But, Rossi continued, raising a hand, it was close. We had to remove her spleen. The bullet in the shoulder shattered the clavicle. We plated it. The real issue was the 3rd bullet. The spine, Enzo said. It missed the spinal cord by 2 millimeters, Rossi said, shaking his head in disbelief. If she had moved an inch to the left, she'd be a quadriplegic. As it stands, there is significant nerve trauma. She will have mobility issues for a while. She'll need months of physical therapy. It's going to be a long, painful road. Will she walk? Eventually. With help. But Enzo, Rossi lowered his voice. She lost a lot of blood. She was technically dead for 30 seconds on the table before we got the rhythm back. She's in a medically induced coma for now to let the swelling go down. We'll wake her in 24 hours. Enzo nodded slowly. Move her to the penthouse suite. Private security only. No hospital staff enters without my men checking them first. Enzo, the administrators are asking for the insurance papers, Rossi said nervously. And the marriage license. They need proof of kinship for you to make these decisions. Enzo reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a black checkbook. He didn't write a check. He just looked at James. James, Enzo said, his voice devoid of emotion. Call Judge McKinnon. Tell him I need a favor. I need a marriage license backdated to yesterday. And get the hospital administrator down here. I'm buying the wing. James stared at him, then sighed, pulling out his phone. I'll make the call. Enzo looked back at the doctor. She wakes up as Mrs. Caruso. Let's hope she doesn't hate the name. Waking up was not like in the movies. There was no sudden gasp, no snapping open of eyes. For Sarah, it was a slow, agonizing crawl through thick mud. First came the sound, The rhythmic beep, beep, beep of a heart monitor. The hum of a machine breathing for someone nearby. Then came the smell, sterile, sharp, like bleach and expensive flowers. Then came the pain. It wasn't a sharp pain anymore. It was a dull, heavy throb that encompassed her entire body, as if her bones had been replaced with lead pipes. She tried to move her hand, but it felt miles away. "Easy," a voice said. It was deep, vibrating through the air like a cello string. "Don't try to move yet." Sarah forced her eyes open. The light was blinding. She blinked rapidly, trying to clear the fog. She wasn't in a hospital room, or at least not one she had ever seen. The ceiling was high-painted with calming clouds. There were heavy silk drapes covering the windows. A crystal vase filled with white roses sat on a mahogany bedside table. She turned her head, the movement sending a spike of fire down her neck. Sitting in a wingback chair next to the bed was the man from the ballroom, Enzo Caruso. He wasn't wearing the tuxedo anymore. He was wearing a black button-down shirt, the sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms covered in dark ink tattoos of thorns and geometric lines. He looked tired. There was stubble on his jaw and a coffee cup in his hand. Memory crashed into Sarah like a tidal wave. The gala, the boy, the gun, the burning. "Leo," she croaked. Her voice was like sandpaper. "The boy." Enzo's eyes softened just a fraction. He leaned forward, placing the coffee cup down. "Leo is fine. He's at home, safe. He hasn't stopped asking about you." Sarah closed her eyes, relief washing over her. "Good. Good." Then the panic set in. Where am I? I have work." "Toby." She tried to sit up. "Stop," Enzo commanded. He didn't shout, but the authority in his voice froze her. He stood up and gently placed a hand on her uninjured shoulder. "You have been shot 3 times, Sarah. You were in surgery for 9 hours. You are not going to work." "My brother," she gasped, tears forming in her eyes due to the pain and fear. "He needs his shots. He doesn't know where I am. The rent—" "Your rent is paid," Enzo said flatly. "Your lease is broken. Your apartment is packed." Sarah stared at him, the drugs making it hard to process his words. "What?" "And Tobias." Enzo continued watching her carefully, is currently in a private room at the Sinai Center for Endocrinology. He has a new continuous glucose monitor, a dedicated nurse and a treatment plan paid for the next 5 years. The room went silent. The only sound was the beep, beep of the machine picking up speed as Sarah's heart rate climbed. "Who gave you the right?" she whispered, fear creeping in. This wasn't charity. Men like Enzo Caruso didn't do charity. "Why would you do that?" Enzo sat on the edge of the bed. He was too close. He smelled of danger and power. "Because," he said, locking eyes with her, "you are my wife." Sarah laughed. It was a weak, hysterical sound that turned into a cough. I'm hallucinating. The drugs." "No hallucination," Enzo said. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a piece of paper. He unfolded it and held it up. It was a marriage certificate. Lorenzo Giovanni Caruso and Sra Elizabeth Miller, dated 2 days ago. "I don't understand," Sarah whispered, her mind reeling. "I never signed this." "I signed it for you," Enzo said calmly. It's legal. The judge owed me.
Why?
She demanded, finding a spark of anger in the exhaustion. Why are you doing this to me? I saved your son. Is this how you thank me? By kidnapping me? Enzo's face hardened. He stood up and walked to the window, pulling back the heavy drape. The lights of Manhattan glittered below. The man who shot you was a Serbian mercenary, Enzo said, his back to her. He failed his mission. The people who hired him are angry. They know you saw the shooter. They know you interfered. If you walk out of this hospital as Sarah Miller, the waitress, you will be dead in 24 hours. They will find you in your apartment in Queens, and they will kill you. And they will probably kill your brother, just to be thorough. Sarah felt the blood drain from her face. The machine beeped faster. Enzo turned around. But they won't touch Mrs. Caruso. In my world, wives are off limits. It is the oldest rule. If I claim you, you are under my protection. The entire underworld knows you are mine now. To touch you is to declare war on the 5 families. He walked back to the bed, looming over her. I didn't do this to trap you, Sarah. I did it to keep you alive. You saved my son. Now I am saving you. Sarah looked at the certificate, then at the man. He was terrifying, yes. But he had also secured 5 years of medical care for Toby, something she had prayed for every night for 4 years. So what happens now? She asked, her voice trembling. I just pretend. There is no pretending, Enzo said. You will live in my house. You will wear my ring. You will be a mother figure to Leo, who is currently too traumatized to speak to anyone but me. And in return, you and your brother will never want for anything again. He reached into his pocket again. This time he pulled out a ring. It wasn't a delicate band. It was a massive, vintage emerald-cut diamond surrounded by smaller diamonds. It looked heavy. It looked like a shackle. Give me your hand, he said. Sarah hesitated. She looked at the door. It was closed. She looked at her legs, hidden under the sheets, numb and useless. She thought of Toby, safe in a private clinic. She slowly lifted her right hand. Enzo slid the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly. Welcome to the family, Sarah, he whispered. Just then the door creaked open. A small head peered around the frame. Papa! It was Leo. He was holding the toy robot. Enzo turned, his face instantly softening. Come in, Leo. She's awake. Leo walked hesitantly toward the bed. He looked at Sarah, his eyes wide and fearful. He saw the tubes, the pale skin. Did I break her? Leo asked, his voice wobbling. Sarah's heart broke. Despite the pain, despite the forced marriage, despite the fear of the Mafia Don standing over her, she smiled. No, sweetie, she whispered, reaching out her hand, the one with the heavy ring. I'm not broken, just under repair, like Optimus. Leo rushed forward and buried his face in the side of the mattress, careful not to touch her wounds. Sarah rested her hand on his soft hair. Enzo watched them. The waitress and the heir. He knew he had made a deal with the devil to keep her safe. But looking at them now, he realized the danger wasn't just from the assassins outside. The danger was that for the first time in 10 years since his first wife died, the ice around his heart was starting to crack. And in his world feeling was a weakness that got you killed. Discharge day was a military operation. There were no flowers or balloons. Instead, there was a sweep of the hospital corridor by 4 men in dark suits who spoke into their wrists. Sarah was transferred from her bed to a wheelchair. Her body stiff and aching, wrapped in a cashmere coat Enzo had provided. It cost more than her car. "We move in formation," James the consigliere instructed the team. "Eyes open. The elevator is held." Enzo stood by the window, watching the street below. He turned only when Sarah was settled in the chair. He didn't smile. He looked like a general surveying a battlefield. "Ready?" he asked. It wasn't really a question. "Do I have a choice?" Sarah replied, her voice weak, but carrying a trace of her old defiance. "No," Enzo said simply. The ride to the estate was silent. They sat in the back of an armored Cadillac Escalade, separated from the driver by a partition. The glass was an inch-thick bulletproof. The rain hammered against the windows, distorting the lights of the George Washington Bridge as they crossed from the city into the dark, wealthy cliffs of Alpine, New Jersey. Leo sat between them, clutching his robot, his head resting on Sarah's thigh. Every time the car went over a bump, Sarah winced, her hand tightening on the leather armrest. Without looking at her, Enzo reached out and adjusted the heated seat controls on her side. "The heat helps the nerve pain," he murmured. Sarah looked at him. "You've been shot before." Enzo stared straight ahead at the rain-slicked road. "3 times, once in the shoulder, twice in the leg. I know the feeling. It feels like ants crawling inside your bones." It was the first personal thing he had shared. It was a reminder. I am a violent man. You are in a violent world. The car slowed as they approached a set of massive iron gates. They were 12 feet high, topped with hermaics that looked medieval. Security cameras swiveled to track the vehicle. The gates groaned open, revealing a winding driveway lined with ancient oaks that looked like skeletal fingers in the headlights. The Caruso estate was not a house. It was a monolith. Limestone and glass, it rose from the cliffside like a fortress. It was beautiful, cold, and intimidating. As the car stopped under the portico, a line of staff was already waiting. Maids, a butler, a chef. They stood with their hands clasped behind their backs, eyes lowered. "They look like they're afraid of you," Sarah whispered. "They are," Enzo replied as the door opened. "Fear keeps order. Order keeps us alive." Enzo stepped out, buttoning his suit jacket. He didn't wait for the driver to help Sarah. He leaned into the car, sliding his arms under her knees and back. "I can—" Sarah started to protest, but the movement sent a jolt of electricity down her spine. She gasped. "You can't," Enzo said, lifting her effortlessly. "Don't fight me, Sarah. You have no center of gravity. You'll fall." He carried her up the grand staircase. She could smell the scent of him. Rain-expensive tobacco and something sharp like gun oil. Her head rested inadvertently against his chest. His heart was beating slow, steady, like a metronome. Inside the house was silent as a tomb. The floors were black marble, reflecting the crystal chandeliers above. It was devoid of clutter. No family photos, no stray shoes. It was a showroom, not a home. "Leo, go with Martha. She has your dinner," Enzo commanded. "But I want to stay with Sarah," Leo protested. "Sarah needs rest. Go." Leo slumped but obeyed, following an elderly housekeeper. Enzo carried Sarah to the 2nd floor, down a long gallery hall, and kicked open a set of double doors. The room was vast. A fireplace crackled on one wall. A king-sized bed with a canopy dominated the center. But what caught Sarah's eye was the wheelchair waiting by the bed, sleek titanium modern. He placed her gently onto the duvet. He lingered for a second, his face inches from hers. For a moment, Sarah thought he might say something kind. "This is the east wing," he said instead. "My rooms are connected through that door on the left. You do not lock that door." Sarah bristled. "Excuse me, I have a right to privacy." "You have a right to safety." Enzo corrected, his voice dropping an octave. "If you fall, if you choke, if you have a seizure from the trauma, I need to be able to get to you. You are not a guest, Sarah. You are an investment I am protecting." He straightened up, fixing his cuffs. "Dinner will be brought to you. Dr. Rossi will visit in the morning for your PT. Don't leave this floor." He turned to leave. "Enzo!" she called out. He stopped at the door, hand on the brass knob. "Thank you," she whispered, looking at the fire. "For Toby." Enzo didn't turn around. "Don't thank me yet. You haven't seen the price tag of this life." He closed the door. Sarah listened to the click of the latch. She was safe. She was wealthy. She was married to the most powerful man in New York, and she had never felt more like a prisoner. A week passed in a blur of agony and rain. Recovery was not a straight line. It was a jagged spiral. The mornings were the hardest. The nerves in Sarah's lower back would scream as soon as she tried to shift weight. Her days were regimented. At 8 a.m., a maid brought a tray of fruit and oatmeal she was too nauseous to eat. At 9 a.m., Dr. Rossi arrived with a physical therapist named Helga, a woman with hands like steel grips who showed no mercy. "Push Mrs. Caruso," Helga would bark as Sarah gripped the parallel bars set up in her room, sweat dripping down her face. "If you don't use the muscles, they atrophy. Do you want to be in the chair forever?" "I'm trying." Sarah gritted out her legs, shaking violently. Enzo was rarely seen during the day. He was a ghost in his own house. Sarah would hear the helicopter taking off from the lawn at dawn, taking him to the city. She would hear the heavy thud of the front door late at night. But she felt his presence, the fresh flowers that appeared daily, the upgraded pain medication when he noticed she was suffering, the way the staff treated her with a terrified reverence. The only bright spot was Leo. The boy had ignored his father's rules about letting Sarah rest. Every afternoon, he would sneak into her room with his backpack. He would sit on the rug beside her wheelchair and read to her or play with his transformers. "Papa says you're broken because of me," Leo said one rainy Tuesday, snapping a plastic wing onto Starscream. Sarah was sitting by the window watching the grey ocean of the sky. She turned the wheelchair around. "Come here, Leo." The boy walked over. Sarah reached out and took his small hands. "Look at me. I am not broken. I am healing. And it wasn't because of you. It was because of a bad man. You didn't pull the trigger. Papa says it's his fault too, that he wasn't careful. Your papa." Sarah sighed, realizing the weight the man carried. "Thinks he controls the sun and the moon, but he can't control everything." That night, the house was particularly quiet. The storm had knocked out the power grid in the town, and the estate was running on backup generators. The lights flickered and hummed. Sarah couldn't sleep. The pain in her back was a dull roar. She maneuvered herself from the bed to the wheelchair, intending to go to the ensuite bathroom for a glass of water. Then she heard it. A scream, high-pitched and terrified. Leo. It was coming from down the hall. Sarah didn't think. She wheeled herself to the door. She pushed it open and rolled into the dark corridor. "Leo!" she called out. Another scream. "No, no, don't!" Sarah spun the wheels, ignoring the pain in her shoulders. She reached the door to Leo's room. It was ajar. Inside, the boy was thrashing in his bed, tangled in the sheets. He was caught in a night terror. Sarah rolled to the bedside. "Leo, wake up. It's okay." She reached out to shake his shoulder. Suddenly, a shadow loomed in the doorway. A gun clicked. "Step away from him." Sarah froze. She looked up. Enzo was standing there, a beretta leveled at her chest. He was shirtless, wearing only silk pajama pants. His body was a map of scars, knife wounds, bullet holes, burns. He looked wild, his eyes adjusting to the darkness. "Enzo, it's me," Sarah whispered, holding up her hands. "He's having a nightmare." Enzo lowered the gun instantly, letting out a sharp curse. He engaged the safety and tossed it onto a chair. He rushed to the bed, but he didn't know what to do. He stood over the thrashing boy, his hands hovering. "Leo," Enzo commanded, his voice harsh. "Soldier report. Wake up." "Stop it," Sarah hissed. "He's not a soldier. He's 6. She pulled herself out of the wheelchair. It was a stupid move. Her legs weren't ready. They buckled immediately. "Sarah," Enzo lunged, catching her inches from the floor. His arm wrapped around her waist, pulling her flush against his bare chest. She grabbed his shoulders for stability. His skin was burning hot. For a moment they were frozen there, her broken body supported entirely by his strength, his face inches from hers in the dim light. She could feel the hard lines of his abs, the scar tissue on his ribs. She looked up into his eyes. They weren't cold anymore. They were wide, frantic, and human. "I've got you," he whispered. His voice was rough. "Help him," Sarah whispered back, nodding at the bed. "Put me on the bed with him." Enzo hesitated, then lifted her and placed her gently on the edge of Leo's mattress. Sarah immediately pulled the crying boy into her arms. "Shh, Leo. I'm here. Optimus is here. The bad guys are gone." She rocked him. She hummed a lullaby she used to sing to Toby, an old Beatles song, Blackbird. Enzo stood in the shadows watching. He watched this woman who was in agony comfort his son better than he ever could. He watched the way Leo's breathing slowed, how he unclenched his fists and buried his face in her neck. Enzo felt a tightening in his chest that had nothing to do with the war he was fighting. It was shame, and it was gratitude. After 20 minutes, Leo was asleep. Sarah was exhausted, her head drooping. Enzo walked forward. He didn't say a word. He picked Sarah up from the bed, carrying her bridal style. "I can take the chair," she murmured sleepily against his shoulder. "No," Enzo said. He carried her back to her room. He laid her down. But he didn't leave immediately. He sat in the chair beside her bed. "The night his mother died," Enzo said into the darkness, his voice sounding like gravel being crushed. "She was in the car with me. They rigged the ignition. I got out. She didn't." Sarah turned her head on the pillow, looking at his silhouette. "That's why you're so hard on him," she realized. "You think if you make him tough, he won't break like she did." "I think if I make him tough, he won't need me," Enzo corrected. "Because one day, my luck will run out, and he will be alone." "He's not alone anymore," Sarah said softly. Enzo looked at her. The moonlight caught the ring on her finger, the ring that had belonged to his grandmother. "No," Enzo said, standing up. "He isn't." He walked to the door. "Get some sleep, Sarah. Tomorrow the tailor is coming. The gala for the mayor is in 3 days." "I can't go to a gala. I can't walk," she protested. Enzo paused at the door. You are Mrs. Caruso. You don't need to walk. You just need to sit on the throne I built for you and let them see that we are not afraid." He opened the door. "And Sarah, yes, the next time you hear a noise in the night, don't come out. I almost shot you." "I know," she said. "Good." He closed the door. But outside in the hallway, Enzo Caruso leaned his forehead against the wood and took the first shaky breath he had taken in years. The Metropolitan Museum of Art was closed to the public, transformed into a glittering cavern of gold and velvet for the mayor's annual ball. This was the lion's den. Every major crime boss, corrupt politician, and ruthless CEO in New York was in attendance, sipping champagne and plotting wars behind polite smiles. For Sarah, the entrance felt like walking, or rather rolling, to the gallows. She wore a custom-made gown of deep crimson silk, designed to drape elegantly over the wheelchair, while concealing the surgical brace around her waist. Her blonde hair was swept up, revealing the diamond necklace that Enzo had fastened around her neck an hour ago. It was cold against her skin, a heavy reminder of who she belonged to now. "Head up," Enzo whispered, his hand resting firmly on the handle of her wheelchair. He was a wall of black wool and tension behind her. "If they smell fear, they bite." "I'm not afraid of them," Sarah replied, her voice steady, despite the trembling in her hands. "I'm afraid of tripping over this dress. I won't let you fall. Never again." The double doors swung open. The hum of conversation died instantly. Enzo Caruso didn't sneak in. He pushed his wife into the center of the room, challenging the world to look at her. And they did. They looked at the woman who had taken 3 bullets and survived. They looked at the waitress who had become a queen. Sarah felt the weight of hundreds of eyes. She saw the pity in the women's faces and the predatory calculation in the men's. "Caruso!" a voice boomed. Vincent Russo, the head of the rival Brooklyn family, stepped forward. He was a large man, smelling of cigars and arrogance. He held a glass of scotch, his eyes flickering over Sarah's wheelchair with mocking sympathy. "A tragedy," Russo said loud enough for the nearby tables to hear. "To see such a beautiful flower broken in the pot. Tell me, Enzo, is she just a decoration now? Or can she still perform?" The insult hung in the air like toxic smoke. Enzo's grip on the wheelchair tightened so hard his knuckles turned white. He stepped forward, his eyes darkening into murder. "Careful, Vincent." Enzo growled. "No, Enzo," Sarah said. Her voice was soft, but it cut through the tension like a razor blade. She unlocked the brakes of her wheelchair. Gripping the armrests, she gritted her teeth against the searing pain in her spine. Using every ounce of strength she had built during those agonizing therapy sessions with Helga, she pushed herself up. The room gasped. Sarah stood. She was shaky, swaying slightly, but she was standing. She looked Vincent Russo in the eye. She was almost as tall as him in her heels. "I am not a decoration, Mr. Russo," Sarah said, her voice ringing clear. "And I am not broken. I am the woman who shielded the Caruso bloodline with my own body. What have you done lately besides hide behind your men?" Russo's face turned a mottled purple. He opened his mouth to retort, but Sarah wasn't finished. She leaned in closer, her eyes locking onto the gold lapel pin on Russo's jacket. It was a small, unique design, a serpent eating its own tail. A flash of memory hit her. The kitchen at the Pierre. The waiter who had shot her. Before he had put on his jacket, she had seen him adjusting his tie. He had worn a tie clip with that exact same symbol. The serpent. Enzo, Sarah said, her eyes never leaving Russo's. The man who shot me. He wasn't a freelancer. He was wearing Vincent's crest. The silence that followed was absolute. Enzo looked at the pin. Then he looked at Russo. The realization was instant. The war wasn't coming. It was already here. You broke the truce, Enzo said, his voice terrifyingly calm. You targeted a child, and you shot my wife. She's a waitress, Russo sputtered, stepping back, realizing he had been exposed by the one person he thought was helpless. She is a Caruso, Enzo declared. He didn't draw a weapon. He didn't have to. He simply nodded to the shadows of the room. Dozens of men's security waiters, even the band members, stepped forward. Enzo's network was everywhere. Leave, Enzo whispered to Russo. Go home and say goodbye to your family. You have until sunrise. Russo fled, his entourage scrambling behind him. The room erupted into whispers, but the balance of power had shifted. The King of New York hadn't just won. His queen had won it for him. Later that night, back at the estate, the adrenaline finally faded. Sarah sat on the edge of the bed, the red dress pooled around her on the floor. She was exhausted, her back throbbing, but she felt a strange, vibrating energy. Enzo walked in. He locked the door, the one connecting their rooms. He walked over to her, kneeling on the rug, so he was looking up at her. He took her hands. They were trembling. You stood up, he said, awe in his voice. I had to, Sarah whispered. He was disrespecting us. Us. Enzo looked at the ring on her finger. Then he looked at her face, stripping away the layers of the Mafia Don, leaving only the man. We had a deal, Enzo said hoarsely. A marriage for protection. A fake life. I know, Sarah said, tears pricking her eyes. Is the deal over? Am I safe now? You are safe, Enzo said. He reached up his thumb, grazing her cheekbone. But the deal is void. Why? Because I don't want a fake life anymore, Enzo whispered. I don't want to pretend. You took a bullet for my son Sarah. But tonight you saved me. He leaned in his forehead, resting against hers. I love you, he breathed. Real, terrifying love. Sarah closed her eyes, letting the tears fall. She thought of the lonely apartment in Queens, the struggle, the invisibility. Then she thought of Leo sleeping down the hall and this dangerous, broken man kneeling before her. I think, she whispered, leaning into his touch, that I love you too. Enzo kissed her then, gentle, desperate, and full of promises. Outside, the rain began to fall on the fortress, but inside, for the first time in a long time, it was warm. The waitress was gone. The queen had taken her throne. And that is the story of how Sarah Miller went from invisible to invincible. It wasn't the bullets that defined her, or the diamonds, or the title. It was the choice she made in a split second to protect an innocent child. In a world full of monsters, she proved that the strongest heart isn't the one that pulls the trigger, but the one that stops the bullet. She didn't just marry the boss. She became the partner he never knew he needed. Wow, what a journey. From the ballroom floor to the top of the underworld. I have to ask you guys a question. If you were in Sarah's shoes, would you have jumped in front of that gun for a child you didn't even know? Let me know your honest answer in the comments below. I read every single one. If you enjoyed this story and want more dramatic romances with crazy twists, please hit that like button It really helps the channel, and don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss the next episode. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.